Alizabeth Leng-Barton of Certified Credit's Talk Data to Me podcast. And today I'm joined by Laird Nossuli, the CEO of iEmergent. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing, Alex?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad you were able to meet us here at MBA Annual. How's the conference been for you?
It's been good. I mean, I love the conversations. I love the different presentations. I just heard Coach K.
Oh, how was that?
Wonderful. It was
wonderful. Yeah,
it's clear why he's a winner.
Yeah.
Year over year.
You know what? It's so funny. We were talking about yesterday having mentors and advocates, but these inspirational speakers that they bring in really help us all understand, what do we need to do to win in this market?
Absolutely.
So, we're talking about today the homing equity, the underserved communities, and the programs that are now available to help with some of that. So how do we make that a winning strategy? What are some of the trends that we're seeing historically, and what can we expect to see in the next, 5 to 10 years?
Well, Ali, that's a really good question and a really important one. I mean, as the industry looks at opportunities for growth, diverse markets really present the biggest opportunity we have.
Right.
I mean, we're talking and worried about a shrinking market, but we have a home ownership gap. And what a lot of people don't realize is that in the 1960s, the home ownership gap was like 26 percentage points.
Oh, wow.
Huge differences between the non-Hispanic white home ownership rate and the black African-American home ownership rate. That gap has actually widened.
Oh, wow.
It's widened by 3 percentage points, which is a lot, really. And so as we look at the next couple of years, we have to understand a couple of things. One is that the minority households are growing at the fastest rate of all, right? So 77% of all net household growth in the last 4 years came from households of color.
Right.
So if we look at that trend line, and it's going like this in terms of demand and homeowners, we look at that decreasing home ownership rate. That difference that you see in the middle is a huge opportunity gap.
Okay.
So, as I talk to lenders about what they can do right now and why it's so important to work on this issue right now, one is it's about growth. Two is it's about, the regulatory environment. This is an administration that's very committed to proactively promoting equity as opposed to just, being anti-discriminatory.
Okay.
And so with those two things, you add in the importance of, doing good.
Right.
It's a win-win-win. It's the trifecta for lenders.
Well, and two, I think if you think of the overall mission of the mortgage industry, it's to get a borrower in a home.
Absolutely.
And it's to have that home for all. We were talking about yesterday at the opening session, the home for all. Having people coming in, making sure that we're pledging as a industry to help serve all communities. And so I think that's really interesting that, we're seeing this trend and we're still seeing that gap.
Right.
So to help with that gap, what kind of innovative programs are available to help increase minority lending?
Well, before I get into the programs, I think the thing we have to think about first is changing the framework.
Okay.
So in the past, decisions and diversity has been really risk-driven.
Right.
Well, it needs to be opportunity-driven. Instead of having, diversity being, peripheral to the business, the core business, it needs to be central. Instead of being, more generic and treating every market the same, every market segment the same, they need to be targeted.
Right.
Strategic instead of, generic, and instead of static, data that we look at once a year, we need to be thinking about things dynamically.
Right. We had a really good conversation yesterday with Suha, and we were talking about changing our perspective of looking at past data to look forward and how that's going to impact our lenders. So is that kind of what you're talking about here with, where is the growth going to happen in these markets?
Right. That's the key thing, going to happen, not what did we do, but where will it be? Yeah. And so, part of iEmergent's, suite of data is forecast, data. So as we look over the next 5 years, we're forecasting, this is without any change in the framework, $2.8 trillion of opportunity with minority borrowers. So with that 29% home ownership gap, even closing that 5 or 10% takes that 2.9 trillion to 3.5 trillion to 3.8 trillion. So when we are concerned about growth, here's a great opportunity. And so to support that, when I mentioned the administration, there are a lot of really new innovative programs, one of which is the Special Purpose Credit Program, SPCP. SPCP isn't new, but the newfound promotion of it by FHFA, Fannie and Freddie is new. And I think it's a great opportunity for lenders to do something that's data driven, that's strategic, collaborative, in a way that targets these underserved borrowers. This isn't about treating everybody equally,
right?
Because systemically, it's not equal,
right?
So it's about doing what we can do from a policy and program perspective, as individuals, as communities, to start promoting, equity in the system.
Yeah.
And we see that in results. We don't see that in, necessarily only mind change, but in, change in data.
Yeah. I think something that really stuck with me about what you said is you're almost saying meet the borrower where they are.
Absolutely.
Don't treat them all as the same borrower,
right,
because they're not. And I think when you're talking about the trends in home ownership, in the next, I think it's 20 years, we're going to see half of our homeowners become Latino homeowners.
Right.
And if we don't take steps now to support that with, bilingual programming,
right,
bilingual education, we are going to see that gap continue to increase.
Absolutely, and there's one area, there's the trust gap, there's the information gap, there's the resource gap, and then there's the, in a sense, the property gap.
Right.
Where can people live? But the one thing when we talk about education, we do a good job understanding that there needs to be better education, of the borrowers. But one thing some of the research that we've been doing lately has shown is that there needs to be better education between practitioners. So one thing lenders can do, when they're looking at creating relationships with realtors or real estate professionals or, other members of the community, they can do a better job and think about educating each other in the programs and products that are available for diverse and underserved home buyers. And that's something that we didn't, until we looked at the survey results, we didn't realize that gap of knowledge was so wide.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the same thing in the credit space.
Right.
You have your real estate professional who is giving advice to a borrower. They're helping a borrower through this process. A lot of the times they're holding that person's hand. But if they don't understand the credit space and then they give them to a lender and a lender says, hey, you can't qualify because your credit score is a 500. But they've been working with that realtor and the realtor didn't know. It's so important for that education to go both ways.
Absolutely.
So I understand where you're coming from with that. We need to work together as an industry to not only treat our borrowers with respect, to educate them, but we need to do that across the board. We need to educate our partners as well.
I mean, that's why collaboration is so critical.
Yeah.
And even thinking outside the box is critical too, because I think traditionally we think of sales partners for lenders being, builders, real estate professionals. Well, what about employers, hospitals, libraries, community centers? It's really when you look at the issues that are at the heart of housing inequity, they're not just about housing. They're about education and health and just the way that communities are designed. So solutions have to be, in a sense, as complex as the problems themselves. So I think those collaborative approaches, whether it's a sales approach or a marketing approach, operations, collaboratively speaking, that's really where these new ideas and this new way of doing things is going to come from.
Right. You talked about two other gaps in there. You talked about that mistrust gap.
Yep.
What are you guys seeing on that front?
Well, we're seeing, one trend I did want to bring up, and it's kind of exciting, is that we are seeing, despite this being a difficult market, lenders coming to us with with a true motivation to do better in this space, right? And that's something that I don't want to say is new, but it is kind of new.
Right.
But what we're seeing with the trust gap is they're understanding that, part of the, if you look at that logic model and the problem, the trust gap is one of those pieces that lenders can do a lot on, right? They can work with borrowers. They can, whether it's through, participation in community events, like instead of saying, okay, I'm going to go into this community to, pitch my programs or whatever. Instead, I'm going to go and I'm going to work alongside them in Habitat for Humanity. I'm going to get to know them so that the trust happens not in the sales transaction, but prior to that. And those are the kinds of, strategies and, I want to call them strategies, but I think it's just like a new way of interacting with their communities that we're seeing lenders finally doing. And it's exciting.
It sounds like when we talk about servant leadership, you are in this situation doing servant leadership from the perspective of you are leading a community by serving them in that aspect, by learning about them, by educating. So that's really interesting. So, we know we're little bit rougher market.
Right.
We know that we don't know when this market's going to end. Why, though, is this the perfect time for lenders to start focusing on those programs, focusing on that community engagement and growth?
Well, I think one of the reasons is from a policy perspective. The administration is going to make that easier. So Senator Thompson, they've made it very clear that their goals are to promote equity. This is going to be an environment where, like things like SPCPs are being positioned differently, so that the risk of doing that, the risk of being intentional, and in a sense having credit policies work differently for different borrowers, it's sort of being applauded instead of being something that's sort of pushed back on.
Right.
So I think there's that. But I think, again, going back to opportunity, this growth of minority home ownership isn't going, like, the change in the home buyer pool isn't stopping.
Right.
It's only going to continue. And so to prepare for tomorrow, whether it's a good market or a bad market, lenders need to do today what they need. They need to have the strategies in place today to work with tomorrow's borrowers.
Yeah.
Those borrowers are not going to be 75% non-Hispanic white.
Right.
They're just not.
Right.
And so that's why this is a good time. I think there's support on the regulatory level, certainly a business case, but most importantly, socially, things are changing. The younger borrowers have an expectation of racial and social equity.
Yeah.
They want to see that from the people they work
Gen
with.
Z is the most diverse population we have ever seen.
Absolutely. And they demand that. They demand conversations of equity from the people they work with professionally.
Wow. I mean, that's a really good position to be in if you're thinking about those things.
Oh, absolutely.
Our future is diverse. I mean, we focus so much on our DEI efforts, and this is why.
Right.
So I think one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, what are you seeing from a perspective of lenders ensuring that their workforce is diverse to meet the needs of the communities they're in?
Well, I think that's a real challenge, for one thing. I think there's the realization that specifically the sales force needs to, and a lot of people talk about looking like the people it serves. And I think that's really true. I think it's a challenge because those numbers just aren't there. So obviously there's recruiting at, historically black colleges. There's, doing a better job with this diverse Gen Z.
Yeah.
But I also think that when you're looking in how do you have a sales force work better with people of all races and ethnicities, it's about finding people who have the same purpose. Right. So yes, it's important to have a more diverse sales force, but you have to have a diverse sales force that's equally committed to diversity.
Right.
So and that's something, and not only do you have to bring them in, you have to place them and prepare them for success. Right. So one thing that industry sometimes does is we buy each other's talent. We need to build talent. We need to grow talent. And that is more of a long game. And this is a long game strategy. Right. And it's problematic because, in a way, the way that the industry works makes it pretty transactional, more short term. We have to shift that and be looking at the long-term benefits, to communities and really to the industry itself.
Right. So, final question. If you wanted to get started with these efforts, you wanted to start reaching out to communities, you want to start looking at those minority lending programs, where do you start? What's your first step in this process?
That's a really good question. I think the first step in the process is to look at where you are now.
Okay.
Right? And that's not because I want to look backwards. It's because I think that we need to establish a baseline. Yeah. Because one thing that people forget is that when you're asking people to change, you have to give them goals, like quantifiable goals. Right. They have to know what change and improvement looks like. They also need to have, milestones, and they need to understand the value of the change. Okay. So I think you start by identifying the problem, showing the opportunity, and then setting milestones for how to get there. Okay. In terms of reaching out to the community, I think it's as simple as reach out to the community. Right. Start thinking about what you can do to learn more, listen more, and becoming more involved. Yeah. I think that's the easiest piece of this.
That's a great place to start because that's something that's actionable now. Right. It's somewhere you can start. You can go into your office after being at MBA and go, all right, guys, we're going to get more involved. Right. We're going to start somewhere. I always whenever I was in college, I had a professor that always said, start somewhere. Right. Doesn't matter where, start somewhere.
Well, if we don't, that home ownership gap is either going to widen or it's going to stay the same.
Yeah.
You know, when things change, if we don't change too, we're not going to see a change in the actual numbers, right?
Right.
And that's the part that what I fear is that we're going to see inaction.
Right.
And so I hope that, you know, lenders look at this opportunity and, you know, take that first step.
Right.
You know, and a lot of the industry is. And I'd like to see, you know, it's really going to require everybody's buy-in.
Right.
Individually and then also collectively as a group.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are all in this together at the end of the day.
I mean,
we're here to help. We're here to help the borrower get into a home. And, you know, that's where we started with this. So I really appreciate you spending the time to talk with me. This is such an important topic. And I greatly appreciate the work that you guys are doing over at iEmergent with, you know, looking at the underserved communities, looking at these minority lending programs. And I appreciate your time.
Well, I have to say, you know, conversations like this, you know, I applaud you guys for putting it as a topic that we need to talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
And we just need to keep talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things whenever our CEO started this business, she was the only woman in the CRA space.
And that's huge.
And that's one of the things, you know, 40 years ago, that was a big deal. But now there's so many women in this industry.
Yeah.
So if we can continue to do that for our underserved communities and start making our industry representative of our home buyers, it's huge.
Absolutely.
So, Laird,
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too.